Welcome back to the program. So here's what I want to talk about in this segment. I want to talk about things that no one else is talking about that are extremely important, especially to the midterms and moving forward. And I really don't care about Boobgate or whatever's going on with Kristi Noem's husband. If you want to learn about that, everybody is covering it, okay? I don't really care. I will say this one thing, okay? There's no way that she didn't know, okay? That's all I'm going to say. 34 years of marriage, really? You know pretty much everything about your spouse. And who knows, maybe because of this weird fetish, that's why they had an unwritten rule where she was allowed to go and bang Corey Lewandowski. Maybe that's why he didn't, put his foot down and say, I don't want you to do that anymore, because maybe he wasn't interested in her. He seems like a freak, an absolute freak. So whatever, that's that. What I want to talk about is an absolute jihadist, okay? An absolute jihadist. Now, I'm the one that warned just about everybody about Ilhan Noor Saeed Elmi when she first came out on the scene. She caught my attention because she was in the Minnesota House, and she was only one of two Democrats back in the day. We're talking 2017, I guess, somewhere around there, 2018, somewhere around there. And she voted for female genital mutilation along with one other person who was like a white Karen. And I was like, holy cow, who is this crazy person? And that's when she got on my radar, and that's when I started to attack her and do shows about her and expose her and where she came from and all that good jazz, right? Well, we've seen Keith Ellison, another jihadist, basically, right? We've seen so many more of these people, okay? And of course, Rashida Tlaib, and the list is endless on how many of them. Jayapal, there's a million of them, right? Well, the one now that's running for the Senate in Michigan is no stranger, because if anybody can remember, and they've been with me for years, maybe they do remember, I actually talked about this guy way back when, in 2020 or 2021, when he was also running for the Senate. Now, at that time, he didn't even come close, thankfully. But this time, he has a real shot of winning the Democratic nominee for the Senate, for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. His name, Abdul El Sayed. Now, he, for the most part, doesn't have any Muslim accent whatsoever. He's been in America a very long time. But let me tell you, he is a jihadist. He was just caught on tape, audio tape recording of some really crazy things. So I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to play you some of the audio so you can hear it for yourself. Michigan's left-wing Democratic Senate candidate Abdul El Sayed told staffers that he wanted to avoid making a public statement about the assassination of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And he didn't want to take any public positions on it at all because, quote, there are a lot of people that I know from my community of Dearborn, Michigan, that are very sad about his death. Let that sink in. A U.S. Senate candidate in Michigan, who obviously is representing Dearbornistan, Michigan, the number one spot for Muslims in this country, just said on a hot mic when he didn't know he was being recorded that many of the people that he knows in his community that he represents are sad because a maniacal, Islamic, fascist, horrible, excuse for a human being, murderer who has tortured and killed and maimed and mutilated people in his own country for 47 years. The people here in America, in the land of the free, home of the brave, are, quote, sad. And this guy is running for the Senate. Let that sink in. This was audio obtained from a private campaign strategy call by the Washington Free Beacon. Reporters pressed him to take a position. And he said, if this happens, if I'm pressed to take a position, listen to what he says here, that he would completely change the subject to Donald Trump and his relationship with, you guessed it, Jeffrey Epstein. It is the Democrat Party's race card. That's what it is, and it doesn't work. So he literally says, if they bring up anything about Israel, if they bring up anything about Iran, and they want me to take a strong position, I'm going to ignore the question, and instead I'm going to pivot to President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. I'm just going to go straight to pedophilia, frankly, El Sayed said. I'll just be like, pedophilia president decides that he doesn't like the front page news, so he decides to take us into another war. This is what this sick, demented, evil, maniacal, crazy bastard is saying. Now, I think this is the clip of it, so you may have to listen closely, but we'll get it here. I think the volume's on 100. Listen closely.
And I'm just going to go straight to pedophilia, frankly. As a black pedophile president, Ryan decides that he doesn't like the front page news, so he decides to take us into another war. There was a time when you all were talking about America first. This seems to be America last. And I'm just going to go straight to pedophilia, frankly.
I'm just going to go straight to pedophilia, frankly. Listen closely.
I'm just going to go straight to pedophilia, frankly. As a black pedophile president, Ryan decides that he doesn't like the front page news, so he decides to take us into another war. There was a time when you all were talking about...
And like I said, no dialect. He sounds, pretty normal. His remarks came during a conference call with his communications team on March 1st, during which the candidate and his communications team discussed his messaging on Operation Epic Fury. The previous day, February 28th, which was the day of the Israeli airstrike that killed the Iranian dictator, then the country's supreme leader, of course, oversaw the murder and torture of political opponents inside Iran and deadly terrorist attacks against the country's enemies, including hundreds of Americans. Then he says, I also want to remind you guys that there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today. Listen.
So, this is going to destabilize the region. I also want to remind you guys that there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today. Mm-hmm. So, I just don't want to comment on...
And his team didn't be like, really? Why are they sad? We have just killed a maniacal Islamic jihadist. But no, of course, these are all white Karens and soy boys that are communists that want to work for this Islamic jihadist. Listen to it again.
Going to destabilize the region. I also want to remind you guys that there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I just don't want to comment on Khamenei at all. I don't think it's worth even touching that.
You don't think it's worth even touching that. Why? Because you're a jihadist piece of shit? Is that why? Michigan, you are absolutely brain dead if they support this psycho. We have the moral high ground here, the candidate said, adding that reporters would, quote, try and bait him into saying, yeah, but isn't it justified now that they took out Khomeini, right? And I just think for us, we've got to be like, no. Holy cow. Dearbornistan has the largest Muslim population per capita of any city in the country, and in 2023 became the nation's first Arab majority city. Though heavily Democratic, Dearborn gave a plurality of its 2024 vote to President Donald Trump. Its mayor, Abdullah Hammoud, Democrat, has called for the destruction of Israel, said Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack was, quote, inevitable, and falsely accused the Jewish state of bombing Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza. El Sayed is the most left-wing of the three major candidates in the hotly contested primary for Michigan's open Senate seat. State Senator Mallory McMurrow, who in October said Israel's war against Hamas met the definition of genocide, before lamenting that stance becoming a, quote, political purity test, also criticized the U.S.-Israeli operation against the Islamic Republic when it began. Instead of focusing resources to ensure Americans have access to health care, housing, jobs, safety, security, and all the other bullshit, this president has chosen a war overseas, yada, yada, yada. Representative Haley Stevens, the more moderate candidate, if there's any such thing as a moderate Democrat anymore, I don't believe there is, instead said that Iran's state sponsorship of terrorism across the globe has led to chaos and unchecked violence, but called for a congressional check on the president's military power. El Sayed also proposed pivoting away from questions about Khamenei by attacking Israel and America pro-Israel groups. You know what benefits from the war? It benefits Israel, who has captured too many of our politicians through AIPAC contribution. Isn't it interesting that dipshits like Fucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, that psycho Nazi, and Candace, the psycho bitch Owens, and so many of these others have the same talking points as Islamic jihadists running for office? Anyone want to put those two together? Unbelievable. El Sayed defended the talking points, arguing that he needed to, quote, take the whole shot. That is, to accuse lawmakers of being tools, both of AIPAC and American lobbying organization, and of Israel. I can shade away from it, but if I'm going to take the shot, I can't just allude to it. I have to go in full force, take the whole shot, which means that I'm going to say, look, you've got AIPAC-backed Congress people who now don't want to empower Congress to step up and enforce its own prerogative, said El Sayed. Ask yourself who's the benefit and why. Ask yourself how powerful that force is in our politics, and they won't even stand up to a president who's making illegal and unjustified wars and all this other garbage. So I wanted people to know this because nobody is covering this. Nobody. There is an outright jihadist, a Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, whatever, Al-Qaeda, Iranian Revolutionary Guard member, the same equivalency, running for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. I'm going to make sure this video is free for everyone to share because I want you to share the shit out of this video, just as I would have done years ago with Ilhan Omar and the rest of these idiots. This guy needs to be exposed immediately. Immediately. Those are my warnings and thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.